Okay, today we will discuss about IPPC, that is Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control. IPPC, it is a special flavor of environmental impact assessment procedure. It is especially built for performing environmental impact assessment of industrial processes. It is a new strategy that is common to all the European Union, and the scope is that of increasing the environmental performances of industries or facilities subject to any authorization. The acronym stands for Integrated P Pollution, P Prevention and Control. Control essentially in this context means or concerns pollution reductions. So the effect concern the activities that tends or are oriented in reducing the pollutant effects. What are the general principles of IPPC? First of all, general principles are that of finding a unique, universal way of managing industrial processes in Europe, so in the European Union. One of the first scope is that of prevent pollution by using, for example, best available techniques. The acronym is BAT, best available techniques. The scope is that of avoiding significant pollution events, avoid significant waste production, or if this is not possible, to enhance recovery or disposal, to promote efficient use of energy, organize monitoring in an integrated, this is why it is called integrated pollution prevention and control, in an integrated manner, prevent accidents and limit the consequences of accidents, promote an appropriate site restoration upon termination of the activity. This is called decommissioning. So, general principles are, as often happen in environmental legislation, are of very general interest. The large scope is that of preventing pollutions, or in more particular, avoid significant events, avoid waste production, and promote efficient use of energy. Organize and provide monitoring and monitoring in an integrated manner, prevent accidents or limit their consequences, promote an appropriate site restoration or decommissioning upon termination of the activity. The IPPC was first introduced in Europe by the IPPC Directive 1996. The EU issued the Directive 96/61, number 61 of 96 European Community, known by its acronym IPPC, which establishes a common set of rules for issuing permits to industrial installations in Europe. So, what is the scope of an IPPC procedure is that of issuing permissions of industrial installation or industrial activity. The directive lays down general principles governing the basic obligation of those responsible for industrial facilities, both new and existing. So IPPC also apply to already existing facilities. Among these, the first is to take all appropriate preventive measures to ensure a high level of environmental protection as a whole, including measures for the treatment of waste, efficient use of energy, prevention of accidents, and the site restoration to a satisfactory state following any termination of the activity. So IPPC deals with measures to prevent pollution. but should mainly involve the use of best available techniques. So one of the instruments that are provided by IPPC is that of BATS. As always, it is the case in environmental legislation, also in IPPC, it is provided, in IPPC, it is provided access to information by the public at large. As always happens in legislative texts, the important parts are in the annexes. So the parts that the environmental engineer should know very well are annexes. In particular, Annex 1 of the directive relates to industrial activities which the rule applies. So it is the first selection of industrial activities. Annex 2 lists the directives mentioned in Articles 18, paragraph 2 and 20. Annex 3 lists the pollutants to be considered in setting emission limits. So in Annex 3, there is a first indication of the concept of emission limits. In Annex 4, are provided some criteria for the identification of best available techniques. So I repeat it again, the tool for IPPC is the key tool for performing an IPPC procedure is that of best available techniques. It has to do with an evaluation of best available techniques. What are best available techniques? Best, most effective in achieving a high level of protection as a whole. So best are really most effective. Available with techniques developed on a scale which allows implementation under economically and technically viable conditions in the relevant industrial sector, taking into consideration the costs and benefit, as we will see in some lectures of next week. The cost and benefit analysis is one of the modeling tools that the environmental engineer may employ in order to evaluate the effectiveness of measures. So available means that the techniques should be available, whether or not they are used or produced in the national context, provided that the operator can have access on reasonable terms. Available means that the techniques, best available techniques, are techniques that may be implemented in reasonable terms. So reasonable means, again, think at the DPSIR classification scheme. I have some drivers, for example, driver of productions. I evaluate pressures, I evaluate the effects on the states, and then I evaluate the response in terms of legislative actions that are expected to limit or prevent the effect of the industrial activities. Techniques refer to the fact that both the technology used and the way of design, construction, maintenance, operation, and closure of the facilities are technical aspects that should be extensively described in the best available technologies reference documents. Why it seems to be reasonable or important to introduce such kind of procedure? I recall you that IPPC is a special flavor of environmental impact assessment. And we said that environmental impact assessment is a technical and legislative procedure with the scope of evaluating the compatibility of human activities with the scope of environmental protection. IPPC, so it is a procedure, again, of the same type. It was thought to be relevant because industrial production processes still account for a substantial share of the total sources of pollution in Europe, especially for pollutants like greenhouse gases, CO2, or the substances responsible for acid rains, volatile organic compounds, and waste, and so on. It is very important to reduce further their negative effects on sustainability, and how we can do that by providing best available techniques. So by we may say it is a collective effort, collective of all the member states of a community in order to select which are the best and available techniques. In this perspective, it is clear that it is more feasible to change the way of production of about 20,000 companies rather than to change consumption habits of hundreds of millions of European citizens. So the point is, that it is more reasonable to intervene at the driver's level or at the pressure level, so at the level of production, in production techniques or production industries, than that of acting at the end point of a chain that is that of the consumers that are 100 million, so it is easier to control 20,000 companies than control hundreds of millions of citizens. Then there is another reason very important for establishing common authorization rules in the EU is the will to avoid the environmental dumping, which may encourage companies to move to those parts of the EU where environmental requirements are less restrictive. So one of the key reasons for introducing integrated pollution prevention and control, is that of making a universal framework law, universal all over Europe, so all the member countries shall apply the same restrictive framework to industrial processes, so that there is no untrustful competition between industries in Europe by, for example, moving productions from states that implement a less stringent set of rules on environmental impact assessment. The idea is we use a universal, common environmental impact assessment framework for industries so that industrial production are not induced to move their activities into their countries where the requirements are less stringent on environmental issues. The instruments chosen to harmonize the conditions and procedures for the issuance of permits are set by the directive, which contains the basic rules for issuing integrated permits. The scope of an IPPC procedure is that of obtaining an integrated environmental permit. In italiano, un'autorizzazione integrata ambientale, environmental integrated authorization. The European Commission held an exchange of information between experts in the various states of the EU, industries and environment organizations to provide support for the authorities who need assistance to determine and establish which are the techniques that can be defined best, so best available techniques. The work is coordinated by the European IPPC Bureau, which is seated now in Sevilla, Spain, and it is divided into approximately 30 sectors consistent with those provided by Annex 1 of the directive. For each area are scheduled about 2 years to complete its work and produce individual documents containing best available techniques. So the reference document that the environmental engineer should consult in order to verify if its production technique is a BAT are called BREFs, Best Available Techniques Reference Documents, that are drafted by the IPPC Bureau and periodically updated. So the second relevant reasons for introducing IPPC besides that of avoiding environmental dumping by setting a common set of rules all over European countries, is that of making technologies available to all the countries in the Europe.
Professor, I have a
That's
question about previous slide, the last sentence where it says that they have to move to other European countries. So what about those countries? Would that affect the European countries? Those have proper strict regulations, or how this is enlightened in IPP annexes or
in the
other European?
IPPC framework. All the countries that are requested to respond to the IPPC directive, means all the countries that are required to implement into their national legislation IPPC directives, shall share the same level of restrictions concerning environmental pollution.
But
Does this answer to your question?
how about international regulations? Because you said that other if they have to move their industries
Production.
in the countries where the less restrictions are. So
Yeah.
how this is in
This is
fact
not possible
affecting?
in Europe because all European countries share the IPPC directive. So they all share the same level of restriction on pollution production. So this has to do with the European Union. Of course, if we want to escape from these restrictions, we have to move our production in third world countries. For example, we can move our production in Pakistan or in India or in Central Africa, in which there are less stringent requirements. But of course, these countries does not adhere to the European Union. The point is, if you want to be a member state of the European community, you have to adopt this restriction level. Otherwise, you will undergo sanctions from the European community. So this does not deal with internationals from non-European Union countries, but with these deals, of course, only for countries that are included in the European Union. Does this answer your question?
Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, I know that we would like to extend this to all the countries in the worldwide, but of course, not all the countries worldwide are ready to sign this kind of agreement. The point is, do you want to be a country in the European Union? Yes, then you have to implement into your national legislation the IPPC requirements in terms of pollution production. What are the BAT reference documents? BAT reference documents contain general information on the sector, a description of the production processes, the current consumption and emission level in the sector, a description of the techniques currently employed, including an assessment of their environmental and economic performance, a choice of the prominent technologies, best available technologies, and a closing chapter in which there is a discussion on the emergent techniques. So what science may provide in the next years. So you see the function of the BREFs. The primary purpose is to assist the appropriate authorities in evaluating if these specific industries is employing a best available techniques. The final decision, of course, remains the sole responsibility of the authorities, because they must still take into consideration the technical characteristic of the facilities and installation, the geographical location, the local environmental conditions. Again, we are not asking for the moon here, but we are trying to remain reasonable in implementing technologies that allows a lowering of pollutant pressures, without impeding the process to be implemented. So, of course, the zero alternative, that is, I'm not going to do anything, is the best alternative from an environmental point of view, but it is not the best alternative from a socio-economical point of view. It is still a matter of finding a reasonable trade-off between the need of implementing industrial activity or industrial production and the need of protecting the environment. The IPPC directive shall guide competent authorities or shall assist competent authorities in evaluating the performance of an industrial production. Now we give a very quick look to our next one. The list of BREFs are classified into different, as we said, different industrial sectors, like pulp and paper manufacture, iron and steel production, cement and lime production, cooling system, chlor-alkali manufacturers, ferrous metal processing, non-ferrous metal processes, glass manufacturers, tanning and hide of hides and skins, textile processing, monitoring system, refineries, large volumes organic chemical, smeltery and foundries, intensive livestock farming, so also farming activities, but also emissions from storage of bulk and dangerous materials, common wastewater and waste gas treatment and management systems, chemical sector, economic and cross-media issues under IPPC, large combustion plants, large volume inorganic chemicals, slaughterhouse, food, drink and meat processes, ceramics, but I wanted to stress surface treatment using solvent, waste incineration, waste treatments, specialty inorganic chemicals and polymers. So you, as an environmental engineer, if you are required to carry an IPPC procedure, I shall first of all find the right placement of the industrial activities I'm dealing with into these categories. Who are the principal actors involved in IPPC procedures? National, regional, and local authorities responsible for issuing permits in the EU member states. So you may immediately understand that, at least in Italy, we are thinking at the Ministry of Environment, and we are thinking to the Environmental Impact Assessment Commission. The European Commission, and in particular the Directorate D3, Industry and Development, from Environmental Directorate General, whose responsibility is to ensure the application of the directive in member states. So at the European level, at the level of the European Commission, we have an actor that is charged of ensuring the application of the directive into member states. Then experts from member states, national agencies for environmental protection, industry and environmental organization to participate to exchanges of information on best available techniques. The so-called IPPC panel, that again is managed by the European IPPC Bureau, which is based on the Joint Research Center in Seville. Then there are some kind of forum for discussions like the IMPEL, and then the public, so you and me, as Article 15 provides, are expected to be involved into decision as well, as it is always for environmental impact assessment procedure. Implementation in Italy. Implementation in Italy started since the law decree of August 1999 number 372, which is the decree that implemented the IPPC procedure in Italy. Then, as it is always the case, we have subsequent modification, like that of Ministerial Decree 26th of April 2002, amendments to the decree of November 2001. Then we have another decree in 2005, and the legislative decree of 2005, number 59. Decree decrees, regulation, and regional guidelines. But as you may expect, all of this legislative framework falls into the framework law on environmental issues, law number 152, 2006, part 2, procedures for the strategic environmental appraisal, environmental impact assessment, and integrated environmental authorization. Integrated environmental authorization is the authorization that is obtained by an industrial plant that is performing an IPPC procedure. In particular, Article 34 of the Law 152, 2006 discuss relationships between environmental impact assessment and IPPCs. And in that article, it is stated that for works and operations subject to environmental impact assessment and simultaneously within the scope of the IPPC legislative legislation of February 2005, number 59, and substantial changes to these industries, the proposer may obtain that the environmental impact authorization the environmental impact assessment procedure is integrated in the procedure for issuance of an integrated environmental authorization. So this is to say that if you, as a manager of industrial facility, you are going to obtain integrated environmental authorization by following an IPPC procedure, then this procedure automatically ensures that you have a positive environmental impact assessment procedure. And you may recall that the positive environmental impact assessment procedure ends with a positive judgment of environmental compatibility. So if you have an environmental impact assessment procedure that is positively carried, then you have that your facility is environmentally compatible, as certified environmental compatibility, then automatically you have an integrated environmental authorization. In particular, in decrees number 59 of 2005, are established measures to prevent, and if this is not possible, to reduce emissions from activities in air, water, and soil, including measures concerning waste to achieve a high level of environmental protection, as also high level of performance. Governing the issuance, renewal, and review of integrated environmental authorization for plants listed in Annex 1 of the directive, as well as how to exercise them. These are already dealt with Law 59 of 2005. But now this law is implemented into Decree 152. What are the scopes of that activities listed in Annex 1, and in particular energy activities, such, for example, power plants, production and processing of metals, mining and industry, activity dealing with waste management, or other activities like paper mills, farms, slaughterhouses, food industry, tanning, but also farming. In addition to the specified activities, electric power plants of more than 300 thermal megawatts are all activities that require an integrated environmental authorization, IEA, or in Italian, AIA. Also, those powered by renewable sources, new or subject to substantial modification, fall within the scope of this decree. So, Decree number 59 of 2005 makes clear what are the industrial activities that are required to undergo an IPPC procedure in order to get an authorizations for their functioning. What are involved subjects? Let's give a look more closely. First of all, it is the company that requires integrated environmental authorization. The company requests this authorization to the competent authority. The competent authority typically is the Environmental Impact Assessment Commission, seated in the Ministry of Environment. It is the competent authority then that comments and communicate to people and to all the stakeholders that are involved in the process. Then there is an information, but it is transmitted to environmental agency. The competent authority has also is obligated to communicate to the environmental agencies. Then the results of these assessments are communicated to the company that maybe are requested to transmit data. So this is a way round flow in which the company transmits data concerning their technology to the environmental agencies. Then the environmental agencies transmit to the company what are the requirements in terms of monitoring the activity in terms of their environmental impacts. Then there is a consistent, continuous dialogue between the competent authority and the environmental agencies. At the end, will be the competent authority, so the commission, that will emanate the integrated environmental authorization that is communicated to the company. Since that moment, the company is authorized to implement its productive process. So you see, it is if you want a less cumbersome procedure, but anyhow, it is always ensure the involvement of the public at large. Who is the competent authorities? Competent authorities to which to provide the information required by IPPC are, for the equipment subject to the National Environmental Impact Assessment, the Ministry of Environment and Protection of Natural Resources, the so-called Environmental Impact Authorization Service, Environmental Impact Assessment Service, that is the service that also builds up the Commission, and the National Environmental Protection Agencies that specifically are in charge of the monitoring of the effects on the environment of human activities. For other plants that are not of national competence, then will be the regions concerned for the autonomous provinces and the National Environmental Protection Agency. What are plants subject to national IPPC? Are of national responsibility facilities listed in Annex 5 of the Decree of 2005. These are guidelines for Italian environmental engineers that are charged of producing IPPCs or managing IPPC procedures for getting integrated environmental authorization. The Italian engineer will look to the Annex 5 of Law number 59 of 2005. Other non-Italian engineers shall give a look to their national legislation where the IPPC procedure have been implemented. In particular, crude oil refineries, excluding industries manufacturing only lubricants from crude oil, and installation for the gasification and liquefaction of at least 500 metric tons or megagrams per day of coal or shale oil or schistose. So there are some limitations linked to the dimension of the production. For power station and other combustion installation with a heat output over than 300 megawatts, again, there is a dimensional threshold that guides the choice if that particular process shall undergo IPPC. Industries for the initial smelting of cast iron and steel, chemical plants with total annual production capacity per class of product expressed in millions of kilograms exceeding the indicated thresholds. Again, it's indicated where in national legislation. So you will look at in Italy the decree, law decree 152, 2006. Facilities functionally related to plant referred to above, located on the same site operated by the same operator who did not carry out activities listed in Annex 1. So there is some kind of specificities linked to where your production activity is sited or other facilities included in the category listed in Annex 1, located entirely in the sea or on a site that extends into more regions. What is in particular the application of Decree number 59, 2005, in the case of landfills, for waste landfills to be authorized under this decree should be deemed satisfied with technical requirements that are met in the technical requirements referred to in the decree law of 2003 number 36. The Italian engineers environmental engineers knows very well this decree, because questo qui è il decreto di scariche. Landfills is the last landfills decrease in Italy. Legge numero 36 del 2003. What are the contents of the applications for integrated environmental authorization? In addition to the information required under the legislation for air, waste, soil, and noise, the application must also describe the plants, the type and scope of the activities, the raw materials and auxiliary substances and energy used or produced by the installation, the sources of emissions, the status of the sites of installation, the type and extent of installation into each environmental sector, as well as identification of significant effects of emissions on the environment. So today, you know how to call these. These are environmental impacts onto the selected environmental components. The technology used and other techniques in use to prevent emissions from the plants or to reduce them, measures of prevention and the recovery of waste generated by the installation, the measures planned to monitor emissions into the environment, outline of the main alternatives studied by the operator, other measures planned to comply with the general principle. So besides all the information needed for the environmental impact assessment procedure, the application for integrated environmental authorization shall also include several details concerning the process. Details concerning the status of site of installation, the sources of emission, but also the technological aspect of the process in terms of energy consumption or material uses. Not only the integrated environmental authorization application shall also consider measures planned to monitor the state of environment in terms of emissions and to, the outlines of the main measures that may be planned to reduce the impact of the activities or the industrial production process onto the environment. As it is always the case in this type of literature, it is also required a non-technical summary. So the application must also contain a non-technical summary of the data set and the identification of information that, according to the operator, should not be disclosed due to confidentiality, industrial, commercial, or personal intellectual property protection, public security, or national defense. So it is always to be included a non-technical summary, but given the special context of application of this environmental impact assessment procedure, it is not required to make available to the public all the details concerning aspects of the productive process that may be protected by patents or may be important for the confidentiality in terms of industrial, commercial, personal intellectual properties, or also in the case that your installation has a relevant importance in terms of national security or national defense. In this case, the applicant shall provide the competent authority also a version of the application without confidential information for the accessibility for the public. So all the confidential information may be taken away, but in any case, enough information shall be provided by the public. There is, as always is the case in these subjects, a strict timetable for submissions of application for integrated environmental authorization for industrial activities as listed in Annex 1 of the decree of the European Directive. The competent authority shall determine the timetables of deadlines for submissions of the application for the integrated environmental authorization for existing plants and for plants that already have other environmental permits at the date of entry into force of this decree. Sorry, here we are talking about the annex of decree of 2005. These calendars are published in the official local organ or plants for plants under state jurisdiction is the Italian official gazette. All the proceedings must be concluded in fair time. In particular, with the decree of year 2005 envisaged October 2007 as the deadlines. Today, there are still some plants that are not complaining to the requirement of the decree of 2005, at least in Italy. The competent authority establishes or just accordingly establishes or adjusts accordingly the schedules, deadlines for submission of application for integrated environmental authorization. So the procedure is carried or issued by the competent authority that identifies the offices to which it should be deposited with all the documents and the records relating to the procedure for public consultation, and tells the operator the date of commencement of procedure within 30 days of receipt of the application. So it is the proposal what makes an application, then the competent authority has 30 days. Then the competent authorities communicate the date of commencement of a procedure that in any case should commence within 30 days of the receipt of the application. The manager of the facility within 15 days from the date of commencement of the procedure should ensure the publication of an advertisement containing the location of the plant and the place where documents can be found or can be viewed and comments submitted. Typically, this is the Environmental Impact Commission services, the EIA service at the Ministry or the Environmental Impact Assessment Commission. Then the public audience. So you are both interested to, in effect, may submit in written forms to the competent authority the comments on the application within 13 days of publication. So there is a precise Timing: after 30 days from receiving the application, the competent authority shall communicate within 30 days the commencement of a procedure. From the commencement of a procedure, the manager has 15 days to communicate to the competent authorities, to transmit all the data to the competent authorities. Then the public has 30 days on the publication of the communication of the starting of a procedure. The public has 30 days to communicate their observation. Timing and additions: convening a special conference of services acquired the determination of administrations responsible for environmental permits and the comments of the stakeholders. The authority shall issue within 150 days a conference of services. So the competent authority has 150 days since the reception of all the information from the manager and all the information from the public or comments from the public. The competent authorities have 150 days to call for a conference of services. Competent authority may request additions to the documentation and indicate a maximum terms of not less than 30 days for the submission of supplementary information required. In this case, the deadlines are also suspended until the submission of supplementary documentation. The requirements for an Environmental Protection Agency by the Integrated Environmental Authorization must be implemented within the time specified by the document and not later than October 30, 2007, but we have already said. But this deadline has not been respecting. So let's give a look at the licensing procedure. It is responsibility of the manager to apply for authorization. Then the manager communicate to the competent authority that communicates the date of commencement of a procedure. This communication is given to the manager, but has 15 days from the communication for publishing an ad on a newspaper. Then the competent authority examines the completeness of information. If it is incomplete, it has 30 days. It requires an integration within 30 days. If it is complete, it may convene, either up to the choice of the competent authority to convene the conference of services. Then it will be the competent authority that will grant the authorization within 150 days after application and make available to the public a copy of the authorization. So you see again, there is an interconnected system of evaluations in which the interconnection is among competent authorities, the manager, so the subject interested to getting the integrated environmental authorization, and the public as well. So what are integrated environmental authorizations? As defined by Article 3 of the Decree of 2005, it is the provision that authorizes the operation of a facility or part of it under certain conditions which guarantee that the same complies with the requirements of the decree. In particular, that the productive process complies with the requirements of environmental protection. It replaces at all effects any other visa, clearance, opinion, or approval in environmental matters that the facility got. What are the general principles considered? The competent authority in determining the conditions for the release of an integrated environmental authorization will consider in the following general principle: be taking appropriate measure to prevent pollution, in particular by applying what? Best available techniques. And where do they can find best available techniques? Into the best available techniques reference documents, BREFs. There must be no significant pollution. In general, should be avoided the production of wastes. Overweight, the waste must be recovered, or if what is not economically or technically feasible should be disposed while avoiding or reducing at most any impact on the environment. Energy must be used effectively, so energy must be recovered if possible. It all be taken the necessary measures to prevent accidents and limit their consequences, should be spared any risk of pollution at the time of termination of the activity. So in the phase of decommissioning, there should be an indication how to reduce any possible of significant risk pollution in the decommissioning phase. Okay, what are the content of the integrated environmental authorization? The limit values for pollutant as expressed by Annex 3 of the Decree 2005 that can be emitted in significant amounts according to their nature and potential for transfer from one environmental matrix to another, water, air, and land, and the limit values of noise emissions under existing legislation or noise pollution. The emission limit values sets in the integrated permits cannot be less stringent than those established by law in the territory where the plants are located. Please note, this is important, the requirement in terms of limit values of pollutants provided by the integrated environmental authorization obtained after an IPPC procedure may not be less stringent than local regulation. For example, in Italy, the regions may require higher or more stringent levels of environmental protection than was required by the national authorities. So in the case that the regional requirements are stronger, the national authorities accept that the authorization is only issued according to the regional requirements. The appropriate control requirements that specify the method and frequency of measurements and the evaluation procedure are also described in the in the integrated environmental authorization. The data collected must be reported to the competent authority for verification of compliance with permit conditions. So it is not only that we issue an authorization of working of a process, but also in the authorization indicated the way of monitoring of procedures for monitoring the compliance of a process to the requirements of the authorization. The measures relating to conditions other than normal operation are also dealt with in the integrated environmental authorization, and in particular, startup, shutdown, and fugitive emission, malfunction, and decommissioning of the plants are also dealt with in the authorization. The requirements for safety and prevention of major hazards communicated to the competent authority by the regional technical committee. Modification to the plant are dealt with in Article 8 of the decree. The operator shall notify the competent authority of any planned plant changes. These, if it deems appropriate, updates of the integrated environmental authorization or the conditions, or if it finds that the changes proposed are substantial, it shall inform the operator within 60 days from the receipt of a notice but he has to repeat the procedure again. The competent authority comments on the deadlines of 150 days. In the case where changes of the ownership of plant management, the old manager and the new operator shall notify the competent authority within 30 days that there has been a change on the ownership. So the authorization is transmitted from the old owner to the new owner of the facility. The renewal of EA of the authorization, the competent authority renews it every 10 years. The integrated environmental authorization confirming or updating them. So it is not forever. An integrated environmental authorization lasts 10 years. The operator, 6 months before the expiry of the authorization, will send a renewal of the application accompanied by a report containing an update of information presented by the release, in the release of the integrated authorization. The competent authority, as in the release phase, has 150 days time to express themselves. So remember, an integrated environmental authorization is not for always, but it lasts 10 years. The review is always conducted by the competent authority when pollution caused by the installation is likely to require the review of emission limits. So if there are some more stringent requirements, or maybe in the positive case, if the requirements on emissions are too stringent, if the best available techniques have undergone substantial changes that allow a significant reduction in emissions without imposing excessive cost, safety of the process or of activity requires the use of other techniques, new provision of community or national legislation dictates so. So in IPPC, it is always left open a window for the European Commission to change the requirements in terms of environmental protection according to changes, for example, in BATs, best available techniques, or according to changes in environmental protection requirements due, for example, to new knowledge is acquired by the Commission. As expressed by Article 11, the operator, before implementing the provision by the authorization, shall notify the competent authority. Subsequently, he must provide to the authority and the municipalities concerned details regarding the control of emissions. So the control measures of emission are also to be communicated not also to the competent authorities, but also to the municipality concerned. The competent authority must also make available to the public the data provided by the operator and assessed through the regional and provincial environmental protection agency, the regularity of measures and mechanisms designed to prevent pollution and comply with limit values for emissions. To be clear, for the Italian situation, it will be the National Environmental Protection Agency that instructs the Regional Protection Agency, in Italy called the ARPA. In Veneto, it is ARPAV, so ARAPAV, so l'Agenzia regionale per la protezione dell'ambiente del Veneto, but it is in charge of evaluating the performance of the plants, of a process, evaluating its consistency with what it is included in the requirement of integrated environmental authorizations. Okay. Inspections, the inspections which are responsible of the operator of the IPPC installation are carried out on plants under state jurisdiction by ISPRA. ISPRA is the National Agency for the Protection of the Environment, while in other cases will be the regional agencies, or the provincial agencies that will take care of inspection. The purpose of inspection are that of verifying that the operator respects in his installation the condition as stated in the integrated environmental authorization and carries out regular controls at its own expenses with particular reference to the regularity of measures and devices for prevention of and respect for emission limits values, regularly informs, but it is the operator that will regularly inform the competent authority of the results of monitoring of emissions and without delay in case of incidents or accidents significantly affecting the environment. So it is the task of the owner to inform competent authorities about the performance of the plant. Communication and inventory of emission as stated by Article 12 and 14, the managers of the facilities in operation as described in Annex 1 shall provide the competent authority, so the Commission or the RPAV, of the Regional Authority for the Protection of the Environment, and the Minister of the Environment through the National Agencies of the Environment, with characteristic data relating to emissions in air, water, and soil referred to the previous year, the format of which is determined by Ministerial Decree of 2001. So the data is also sent to the European Commission as provided by the directive by the IPPC directive. So the IPPC directive requires the member state to communicate to the European Commission data concerning the performance of their plants. The competent authority every 3 years by April 30 must send to the Minister of Environment and Protection of Natural Resources communication on the application of the decrees. So in particular, it is the responsibility of the Ministry of Environment, so of the competent authority to communicate to the Ministry of Environment, but will communicate to the European Commission all the data information concerning the performance of this industrial production. This is consistent with the schema of the IPPC directive. As I told you, the IPPC directive is made up not only for reducing the risk of environmental dumping, but also for allowing the circulation of information concerning technological, the functioning of the best available technologies. So this is why it is required by the Ministry of Environment to communicate to the European Union information concerning the performance of their plants, so that the European community, by means of the IPPC Bureau in Seville, may update the BREF's documents appropriately by including all the technologies that have been developed during in the European Union. Article 6 deals with penalties. I leave you the pleasure of reading this article in detail. And we stop with the lecture of today here. If you have any questions, I will wait for your questions in classroom. Otherwise, I will quit classroom and we will see. We will meet with the next lecture on environmental impact assessment on next Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. I'm waiting for your questions. Otherwise, I will close the classroom.
Thank you, Professor.
You are welcome.
Thank you.